It's a somber-looking piece, isn't it? With the rather drab blues, the view from a window offering an almost emaciated landscape, and the ghostly eye-like natural satellite presiding over it all. Judging a book by its cover in this case may give you an accurate sense of one of the book's moods, but little impression of the extraordinary degrees of introspection, patience, hope, fortitude, and learning it contains. Brother Do You Love Me is a true story about great mental and emotional endurance. You quite possibly came across Ruben Coe's artwork at some point during the Covid-19 pandemic. Felt-tip renditions of what are typically youth-oriented subjects, epitomizing a rather familiar visual language, which adorned NHS Christmas cards at the time. Few could have surmised the depth of the artist's personal trials during and before this period. Ruben had long been struggling to come to terms with, as he and his brother Manny would emphatically insist on phrasing it, having Down syndrome. This contention left him feeling profoundly isolated at a time when everyone was adjusting to limited social interaction. He fell into depression, ceasing to utilize his voice to its fullest extent, but he clearly never lost sight of the healing capacities of familial love. One simple but grand interrogative text message from Ruben to Manny one night essentially led both of them on a quiet quest to prove and understand such capacities. In Manny's eyes, silence is something of a benign evil in he and his brother's lives, and with communication being key to Ruben's recovery, he often contemplates how the very matter and form of spoken and written language concerns him. He might very briefly engage in etymological inquiry, for instance, contemplating the curious origin and meaning of the word care, and how these relate to his feelings toward depression's brutality with personality and character. Indeed, Manny at one point characterizes depression as a loss of the sense of self. Or he'll encourage the reader to momentarily adjust the use of their tongue during an utterance so that they can hear how Ruben renders the word sausage. Both are also examples of an important intention of the memoir, an intimate and contemplative engagement with empathy. Indeed, there is certainly a willingness to question society's perspectives on and approaches to both mental health and learning disabilities as well. Its emphasis on difference rather than similarity is perhaps the primary and undoubtedly narrow target. This comes from a place of admirable humility, however, for Manny proclaims himself as, quote, part of the system, unquote, susceptible to the same flaws of the system under fair scrutiny. Through the description of Ruben's own expressed, as well as suppressed, discomforts and trials, Manny reminds us of the very general undesirable elements of the human condition, implicitly and gently expressing that the reconciliation of our perceptions with external reality and the self-acceptance this involves is a task that all of us, learning disability or no, must face. He therefore attempts to make the reader feel intimately acquainted with their lifestyle and the difficulties and joyful moments which these entail. With great candour, he'll narrate the extent of the energy it takes to care for someone with severe depression, and with equally great pleasure he'll skillfully deliver the comedy inherent in Ruben's natural cheek, courage, and stubbornness. It periodically feels like a cathartic breath has been taken at the end of many portions of its discourse, by both the reader and by our two authors, with a simple exchange of dialogue often acting as an expression of delicate and calming sentiment. For a memoir written from a relatively unique perspective, it certainly makes one's experiences of apathy, anxiety, isolation, and alienation feel heard and valid. Sophie Pavel describes it as a manifesto for how life should be lived. I reckon you'll understand why if you read this. Gentle, somewhat colloquial, friendly and emphatic, Brother Do You Love Me reminds you of a few fundamental truths about responsibility and dedication. It's a Waterstones Book of the Month for good reason.